I'd just like to add one thing that I didn't mention. When we were doing the testing with our town clerks, they actually asked us, could we put a question on there if people want to be a poll worker? So you will see that on both our online voter registration, but also on our My Voter page. There's a question that says, would you like to serve as a poll worker? Yes or no? And that came from the clerks. So that came from the clerks coming up to us. We thought it was a great idea. So.
I remembered what I was going to say earlier. And this is something that is national, has an impact nationally, and every state is facing the same challenges as Washington State, that most of us bought new election equipment and replaced our voter registration systems and did all of those things in the mid-2000s. And now we're looking at equipment that is 7 to 10 years old at best. And so our state is going through a process right now, working with our county auditors and local election officials to really identify what we want our system to be. And we spent about a year wireframing all of the business needs of all of these systems. And I think if you look at your individual states, I imagine most of us have piecemeal different things, like adding a personalized voter registration experience and voter information experience and having election night reporting. And we have all of these things that we've done to improve our service delivery. And now we're trying to keep all these plates spinning. And so we're trying to have a more comprehensive approach in moving forward. And I mention this because I imagine most of your states are going through a similar exercise of trying to figure out what's our next voting system going to look like? What's our next voter registration system going to look like? And now is a really good time to be thinking about your military and overseas voters, because many of these policy recommendations would be very easy to implement if you build it into a system you're going to bring up from scratch. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with our system, is what would be really nice to have, and then hopefully there's a vendor solution out there at the other end.
There are just two things that I would ask for individuals who are in the audience who are either legislators or who are involved in the legislative process, and that is, we were speaking about the federal postcard application, and the reason that this came up is that there are some states that if a military person or an individual overseas uses that federal postcard application to register, they're not considered a fully registered voter in that state. They're on a temporary status, and they're canceled at the end of the year. So what I would ask you is, just when you go back to your respective states, to take a look at how military voters are being treated in your statute, and whether or not they're actually put on the voter rolls, receive a voting history like all other voters, and take a look at how they're being processed. And you may be surprised, and if you are, hopefully you'll consider moving forward and changing that part of the statute. And all the individuals that have served on these working groups are available to you as a resource, to speak at informational hearings, to come and talk to your respective members. Additionally, with the federal postcard application, we heard about online voter registration. And as was mentioned, there are 28 states that already have online voter registration. Speak to your chief elections officers, your secretaries of state, your state elections directors, and find out if this federal postcard application is considered in the integration of your online systems, so that military and overseas members have a one-stop shop along with other voters to take care of all of these needs. And part of the reason why that's important is the federal postcard application allows that voter to receive some additional services, like being able to get their ballot electronically delivered to them 45 days before every federal election. And that allows them the time to actually get their ballot, and hopefully enough time to return it so that it can be counted by the local offices. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we are available as a resource to you, and that those are two things that I would hope that you would take out of this session this morning, is to go back and take a look at how these voters are being treated in your respective states.
A question for you, since we're talking about the 45-day requirement, we're talking about electronic registration, we're talking about electronic ballot delivery, electronic ballot return. Do you see any possibility in the future of the reduction of the number of days required for Uocava voters to participate if we continue to demonstrate progress in this area, so that we're not continuing to have an extension? For example, I remember when I was a little boy, my daddy when he was running, they had a 3-week runoff. And we had a 4-week runoff. Now we have a 6-week runoff. Now with your new requirements, we got a 9-week runoff. We're not interested in that. So then we'll be running all the time. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Part of what is unique with this voting population is not necessarily that there's the time and distance element, but in many cases, they don't always have access even to the internet. So for some of those remote locations, you'll have voters that go down into a village once a month that has an internet connection that they're able to log on, or you have individuals that are out on submarines or in remote areas that they don't have the ability to access the internet, even though they can get online. What we've heard from many soldiers, that is when they do have that precious little time to be online, that they're using it to Skype back home and to FaceTime with their families. So I think that allowing a voting period is still preferable, because then the voter has the ability to receive their ballot, not have to cast it immediately in that same session, and it allows them time to review their options, to make their choices in the same way that a voter voting absentee or early at home or by mail has that same ability. It's quite possible that that can change as the world evolves, and I would foresee that eventually we might get there, but it probably will be quite a while, in my personal opinion.
And I just want to add that in Vermont, when prior to UACAVA, we had a 30-day no excuse absentee or early vote period. And once UACAVA came down with the 45-day mandate, we actually extended for all voters out to 45 days. So Vermont's been very proactive about this. We believe in it. We think it's a positive for our voters to have that full 45 days to request and receive and actually send back their ballot.
Jim, do you have runoffs?
No, we do not.
That's why you can do it.
Actually, I just wanted to add on to your question. As far as, do you see that we might shorten that time to mail out ballots? And I really don't see it. I think what most states are facing when they implement and move and trying to accommodate that 45-day deadline for the federal elections, then voters in the cities and school elections were saying, well, hey, why can't a military voter get the same length of time to vote a ballot? So I think, if anything, we'll see, that 45-day minimum. I don't see it getting any shorter, just because of the complexity of programming ballots and making sure that all your deadlines are met. So what we've seen, I think, in Texas, and Keith, you can speak to this, is that voters in city and school elections, they want to be able to have the military have the same voting rights as in a federal election.
Do you have runoffs?
Yes, we do.
And so do you have a 9-week runoff period?
How much is it, Keith? 70 to 77 days. It was a big
So you
tweaking
have
of
a
our
9-week
election
runoff
calendar.
at least. At
Yeah.
least.
It made a huge change to our election calendar.
Secretary Merrill, I just want to tell you, I feel your pain with the runoffs, because up until Florida did away with their second primary, we had, and I started my voting experience in Florida as an Escambia County voter a little bit before David took over. And I can tell you that because of that 30-day and 45-day deadline that Florida was under because of a judicial consent order prior to HAVA and the MOVE Act, we got 5 ballots for 3 elections. We would get a primary election ballot, we would get an advanced second primary ballot to meet the mailing deadlines, then we would get the real second primary ballot, but before we could vote that, we had to get the advanced general election ballot before that election was held, and then we got the regular general election ballot. And if you really want to confuse your voters, that's how you do it, because I kept going, didn't I just vote on this ballot? Why do they keep sending me these ballots? And like all good voters, I wasn't reading the instructions that were provided, so you're just getting this. I mean, it can be really crazy and confusing, and that's why it took us a long time. What was it, David? About 6 years to finally get rid of our second primary, just because it was as the numbers kept dropping, and it really did make serving the military voters much easier and much less confusing for the military voters.
Thank you. Now that I can see again, by the way, had a migraine, and all of a sudden everything was seeing 3 and 4 of those things, so I apologize in my intro. But I think what you're going to see here is all of these recommendations when we talk about what we're doing here. It's really about providing the best customer service to our military and overseas voters. I think we all can agree, no matter what state we come from, no matter what background we come from, that military members, because of what they do day in and day out to protect our country, that they deserve not just what the law says, but they deserve our very best. So, as Secretary Wyman mentioned, a lot of these recommendations are customer service, best practices, things that you would experience when you do online transactions to purchase things, things that we do in our normal day-to-day life. All we're doing is translating some of those best practices and things that we know that works well in private sector and industry. We're translating that over into the voting community, and to afford our military members, their families, and our overseas citizens the best opportunity that they can to cast their ballots. When you take a look at this effort, I am absolutely so pleased to see all of this work. As Lance mentioned, to get state, local election officials, policy advisors together, federal agencies such as the EAC, NIST, and the Department of Defense, all working together on this incredibly important idea of making sure that our military members can return a ballot is something really, really exciting. And I can't express how grateful I am to the collaborative efforts of all of our working group people, both on the policy and the technology side. It's really great. And I think it's really important to also note, too, is just as we were forming this cooperative agreement with the Council of State Governments, the Presidential Commission on Election Administration's report came out. And what we decided to do was take that report and make it the absolute foundation of the policy working group. So you'll see that these recommendations, if you were to pick up a copy of the Presidential Commission, the Presidential Commission report, you'll see these in there in probably a really long paragraph. And I think that both the co-chairs of the commission and the 2 commissioners that are here, Ann McGeehan and Tammy Patrick, would say, wow, this is something that they would never have expected, but are pleasantly surprised that a group of folks would take those recommendations and run with them. So I'm really proud to be a part of this, and I know that everybody involved is as well. So on behalf of the Department of Defense and the Council of State Governments, I wanted to thank our panel members here for doing such a great job for us today. So how about a round of applause for them? And to all of our legislators and our chief election officials, state and local election officials from the Department of Defense, we really appreciate everything that you do to serve our voters. You guys, in some aspects, jurisdictions have a very low amount of our military and overseas voters, but we know that you guys work hard every single day to make sure that they have every opportunity to have their vote counted. So thank you very much for coming today, and thank you, panel. Nicely done.